While I attended graduate school, I worked the night shift for a security firm, mostly as a gate man for a yacht club. But frequently, the security firm had me fill in at a factory that made die-cast metal parts for Ford Mustangs. Throughout the sparsely lit, massive factory warehouses that held huge metal kilns full of molten metals, the machines hissed and gurgled liquid metal in the dark. And I had to remind myself as I walked my rounds all alone that I was there to scare off the bad guys. But that didn't seem to help me much. Late at night, I would get scared and I'd ask myself, why are you so afraid? And I'd realize it was because I felt all alone. I remember in college how difficult it was to ask a girl out on a date, even though what I was asking a girl for permission to do was, can I spend all of my money to feed you and provide some entertainment for a moment of your life? But asking a girl out on a date was quite scary. And I'd think, why are you so afraid? And I'd realize it was because I felt all alone. When I began working as a pastor and began my first 2 years of preaching, I was a nervous wreck. My hands would shake, my voice would shake, my eyes would have such bad tunnel vision that I could barely read my notes. And I'd ask myself, why are you so afraid? And I'd realize it was because I felt all alone. Several years ago, I performed a wedding for a couple in which the parents of the groom insisted that I include a story from his childhood. The groom, when he was only about 5 years old, began crying in the living room during a tear-jerker of a movie. The family only realized this when they came back from the kitchen where they were getting some snacks. When they noticed his tear-stained cheeks, they asked, "What's wrong?" To which he replied, "You left me all alone with my feelings." Why was he so afraid? He realized it was because he felt all alone. There was a time when Jesus' disciples felt all alone as well. We can read about it in the book of Mark, chapter 4, verses 35 to 41. And it reads, "That day when evening came, he said to his disciples, 'Let us go over to the other side.' Leaving the crowd behind, they took him along just as he was in the boat. There were also other boats with him. A furious squall came up, and the waves broke over the boat, so that it was nearly swamped. Jesus was in the stern, sleeping on a cushion. The disciples woke him and said to him, 'Teacher, don't you care if we drown?' He got up, rebuked the wind, and said to the waves, 'Quiet, be still.' Then the wind died down, and it was completely calm. He said to his disciples, 'Why are you so afraid? Do you still have no faith?' They were terrified and asked each other, 'Who is this? Even the wind and the waves obey him.'" Now picture this. The sun began tucking itself in for the night behind the western horizon, and Jesus said to his disciples, "Come on, guys, let's get out of here." He had just healed an entire town, healed a leper, remotely healed a centurion's son, cured Peter's mother-in-law's fever, and cast out a crowd worth of demons. So, without fighting their way through the thick crowd of people to grab an overnight bag of clothes, they pulled anchor from the boat that Jesus had been preaching from, and they pushed off from the shore. Many others from the crowd, like paparazzi, jumped into their own boats and stowed away in others to follow this magic man named Jesus. Now, the Sea of Galilee is about 13 miles long and 8 miles wide, and it is still, to this day, known for its sudden storms. Surrounded by mountains, strong winds enter a trough-like opening and begin to swirl around violently. The Bible tells us that a storm arose, but it wasn't a typical storm. For that reason, the gospel writers in this story use terms like cyclone and tempest to try to describe what it was really like. Matthew, one of the men on the boat, described this storm in his gospel with the word seismos. That's right, the same word for earthquake. It's got to be some storm to call it an earthquake. It was quite a shaking. Perhaps you are in a storm today. Have you said one of these phrases lately? "I'm drowning in debt. My house is underwater. I'm just trying to stay afloat. I'm just treading water here. I can barely keep my head above the water. I've got this sinking feeling. or I'm all washed up. And now you're crying out, trying to scream over the storm, but Jesus doesn't seem to hear you. You find him sleeping, and you've prayed. Don't you even care if we drowned? Well, you're not alone. The fact that these disciples turned to Jesus for help really is baffling. Many of them were expert sailors who had spent years handling a boat and who'd been in countless violent storms on this lake. They scurried to the end of the boat where Jesus slept to ask for help from someone who had never handled boats professionally, but had instead trained as a carpenter with his father in Nazareth. How could a carpenter help these expert sailors when all their professional solutions had been exhausted? How desperate do you have to be as a sailor to turn to a carpenter for answers? In the midst of the storm, the disciples' faith in the power of Jesus became clear. Finding themselves completely at the end of their ropes, they now throw all of their hopes upon Jesus, their spiritual teacher. They disregard that he had never sailed a boat. They don't look at his human abilities, but of God's divine abilities that they've already witnessed in him. They stop looking for human solutions, even though they were the human experts in the middle of the water. Instead, they throw everything that they've got into the miraculous hands of Jesus. So Jesus sits up from his much-deserved nap and replies with just 2 words. 2 words are enough. The first word can be translated by the English phrase, "Be silent and keep doing so." And the second word from Christ's rain-drenched lips is even stronger. We lose a lot in translation here because the second word literally means put a muzzle on it and keep it on. Be silent and keep doing so, and put a muzzle on it and keep it on. Don't you love that? Can't you just imagine being there, hearing Jesus say that? In light of this picture, I want to ask you a question. Why are you so afraid? Is it because you feel all alone? How many storms does Jesus have to calm before we can comfortably ride through one with him? Does he still have to calm the storm before we stand in overwhelming awe of his power and control of eternity? Or are we only on this boat because we prefer a life of calm over a life of conviction? If that's the case, we'd better not get in the boat with Jesus, because he's been known to sail right into the types of storms that make professional sailors cry. I want you to hear me clearly now as we see the aspect of the story that should bring the most hope to all of us today. And here it is. As surely as Christ could not have sunk with his disciples on that day, he will certainly not let you sink on this day. Let us all take hope in this thought today.